My name is Judith Grantham, and the first time I realized I'd become invisible in my own family, it was quiet, subtle, almost polite. They didn't yell. They didn't shove me into the shadows. They simply moved around me like I was furniture. But what no one expected, certainly not my son or his elegant little fiancée, was that a woman like me, who spent 40 years transcribing every word in courtrooms, would know how to capture silence and how to use it. So before you sit down and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. This isn't just a story, it's a warning, a mirror, and maybe a reckoning. When I had Michael, I was already 39. A late bloomer, they called me. A miracle mama. Widowed young. I raised him on my own in a modest townhouse in Tacoma, Washington. Worked as a court stenographer, my fingers clacking through custody hearings, criminal trials, divorces that could make the devil blush. Precision was my job. Observation was my survival. I gave him everything. A clean home, violin lessons, college funds tucked away in CDs, hugs that smelled of cinnamon and pressed wool. And I never asked for anything in return, not even a phone call on weekends. But when he met Callie, something changed. She was presentational, that's the best word for it. Blonde hair always swept like it was caught in a shampoo commercial. Lips outlined in that kind of brownish pink only influencers seem to wear. Her laugh was like a wine glass tipping over. She called me Mrs. Grantham for 3 years, even after I told her to call me Judith. I should have known then. The engagement dinner was supposed to be held in a rented space near the water. Something romantic, something scenic. But 1 week before the event, Callie texted me directly. "We figured it's more intimate to have it at your place. More nostalgic for Mike. Hope that's okay?" There was no punctuation in that text. Just manufactured sweetness, like something out of a syrup bottle you couldn't quite close. I smiled and said yes, of course. What else could I say? Michael came over to help prep, though. That only meant carrying up a few wine crates Callie had selected. He spent more time in his phone than looking at me. And while he scrolled through wedding playlist ideas, Callie stood beside my hallway mirror adjusting her lipstick. "I told him we should get rid of some of this old lady furniture after the wedding," she said casually. I didn't react. She kept talking. "Maybe repaint. That beige is so hospice." I just kept setting the table. Fork, knife, dessert, spoon. Repeat. I had done more damage control in divorce courts than she'd done in her entire life. She didn't scare me, but it did sting. Michael said nothing. Not once did he say, "Mom, I love this house." Or, "That's out of line, Callie." He just let her do the talking, like a puppet whose strings were replaced with hair gel and entitlement. That night after they left, I sat on the couch with a mug of tea and one of my old court recorders in my hand. Still worked. I hadn't used it in years, but the thing had survived 3 moves, a minor kitchen fire, and 2 decades of tears. I turned it on, watched the red light blink, and for the first time in months I felt like I had control again. Not over them. Not over my son's weak spine or his fiancée's forked tongue, but over what they couldn't hide anymore. Their own words. I started small. Casual visits. Subtle placement of the recorder in a vase on the sideboard. It picked up more than I could have imagined. From the dining room. "She's still alive." I figured she'd keel over by now. "She eats like cottage cheese and dreams." From the hallway. "Babe, once the wedding's done, we get her to sign the living will. Then we're golden. You can even convert the back office into a Pilates room." I didn't cry. I wrote everything down, like I'd done my entire life. Only this time, the record was personal. This time, I wasn't just documenting pain. I was preparing a case. The engagement dinner was scheduled for Saturday 6 p.m. I ordered new napkins. Not for them. For me. Soft gray linen with little embroidered thistles. Sharp, delicate, enduring. Just like me. The morning of the engagement dinner, I woke before the sun. My hands moved through rituals I had mastered over a lifetime, polishing silver, decanting wine, folding napkins just so. Not because I cared about the guests, but because my dignity demanded precision. I wore a navy crepe dress that day. Nothing flashy, but elegant. Fitted just enough to remind people I still had a figure. My pearls were from my mother, the only heirloom Callie hadn't tried to borrow. By noon, the house was filled with the aroma of rosemary and roasted garlic. My roast chicken, not hers. She had wanted catered sushi, something less Midwestern. But I insisted on cooking. They agreed, probably assuming I wouldn't live long enough to matter. At 4, therapy. The florist arrived with calla lilies. Callie's choice, of course. She never missed a chance to imprint her taste over mine. Still, I arranged them with grace. I had one hand on the vase when she walked in, all gloss and heels and high-waisted ivory pants. Callie surveyed the room like she was appraising a property she'd already claimed. "Oh, Judith," she said, drawing out the syllables like bubble gum. "You didn't forget to move the family photos, did you?" I tilted my head. "Why would I?" She gave a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, we want the space to feel neutral for the guests. Not like a museum of your memories." I didn't flinch. Instead, I took a step closer and said, with a softness only a court veteran could summon, "You might want to be careful, Callie. Memories have a way of making themselves known even when you try to erase them." She blinked, and for the first time she didn't have a comeback. By 6 o'clock, the room buzzed with polished shoes and polite chatter. Guests filled the dining room and spilled into the living room. Neighbors, old college friends, her parents who didn't bother to say hello, and a few of Michael's colleagues. I sat in my own armchair near the bookshelf, mostly ignored. Occasionally, someone would approach and say, "You must be so proud," like I was a retired dog whose only role was having once fetched the ball. Then I heard it. Callie in the center of the room holding a glass of Prosecco. Michael beside her, smile stretched thin. "Thank you all for being here," she began. Her voice was syrup, poisoned syrup. "We're so grateful to start our new life together. And of course to my future mother-in-law." She turned her eyes to me with a flash of theatrical pity. "Who's graciously letting us celebrate in her charming little home." Polite laughter followed. I smiled. She wasn't done. "I know we've had our moments," she continued. "But from day one I've admired Judith's tenacity. I mean, she's still here. And she hasn't let age or outdated furniture slow her down one bit." A few people shifted in their seats. Michael laughed softly but didn't meet my eyes. Then she raised her glass eyes, gleaming with malice. "To mothers, especially the ones who teach us what not to become." There it was. The dagger. Public veiled in crystal. And everyone saw it land. I set down my teacup. Calmly. Precisely. I stood. "May I?" I asked, my voice steady. Callie looked surprised. But she nodded. Maybe she thought I'd play the game. Offer a bland thank you and fade into the furniture again. But I didn't pick up a glass. I picked up a small Bluetooth speaker from the bookshelf. "Before we raise another toast," I said, "let's hear something from the bride-to-be herself." The room quieted. Curious smiles. Mild confusion. I pressed play. The recording filled the room like wildfire. "She's still alive. I figured she'd keel over by now. That beige is so hospice. Get her to sign the will." Then Pilates room, baby. Callie's face drained of color. Michael stood, frozen lips parted like a caught schoolboy. A woman near the window gasped. Someone dropped a fork. The DIL's mother tried to stand. There must be some mistake. But I pressed play again. I told Mike the sooner she's out of the picture, the faster we can really live. She's dead weight. Just a little older than expired milk. Dead weight. Expired milk. I let it play. Every word. Every cruel whisper. Let them all hear what I had been hearing for months. And when it ended, the silence was beautiful. I looked around the room and smiled. "My furniture may be outdated," I said, "but it's not as old as those lies." Then I walked to the foyer, picked up my purse, and said quietly to no one in particular, "I'll be in the garden enjoying my property. You're welcome to see yourselves out." Because what they didn't know, what they never even thought to ask, was that this house, it wasn't in Michael's name. And it never would be. The garden was quiet, save for the gentle hum of cicadas and the faint clinking of glasses from inside. I took a seat on the wooden bench beneath the dogwood tree, the one Michael used to climb when he was small and fearless. It bloomed early this year, as if it knew I needed something soft in all this sharpness. I sipped my tea. It had gone cold, but I didn't mind. I didn't need heat to feel power. Inside, I heard voices begin to rise. Not mine. I imagined Callie frantically trying to laugh it off, spinning some tale about deepfakes or context, while her parents pulled her aside with frozen smiles and pale faces. Michael wouldn't defend her. He never really had. But he wouldn't defend me either. I closed my eyes, let the spring air kiss my cheeks. Then the door creaked open. Footsteps. Hesitant ones. "Mom?" I didn't answer right away. I let him sit beside me first. He wore the same expression he did the first time he crashed his bike into a fire hydrant. Shame mingled with confusion, waiting for me to fix it. "I didn't know she said all those things," he started. "Didn't you?" I asked, not looking at him. Silence. "She's under stress," he added. "Planning the wedding. Her mother's pressuring her. And I should have spoken up, I know. But I just wanted peace. Peace. It was always the excuse, wasn't it? Men like him, weak but not cruel, stood behind the shield of peace, while the women in their lives bled. "I heard your voice on those recordings too, Michael," I said. He flinched. "I never insulted you." "No," I said. "You just stood there while she did." I turned to look at him. Really look. "You know what silence sounds like in a courtroom, Michael?" I asked. "It sounds like guilt, and complicity, and cowardice." He dropped his gaze. "I never meant for it to go this far," he muttered. "But it did." I stood, brushed imaginary dust from my skirt. "Your father built this bench," I said. "When you were 10, he carved your name into the underside. Do you remember that?" Michael nodded faintly. "I do," I said. "And that's why I'm not throwing you out tonight. But make no mistake, you are a guest in my home, not an heir." He looked up startled. "What do you mean?" I smiled. There was no venom in it, only clarity. "I changed the will last year," I said. "And the deed." His mouth opened, but no sound came. I stepped closer, lowered my voice so only he could hear. "You and Callie plotted to move me into a care facility. You discussed it openly, but I spent my life documenting lies for a living. You should have known I'd see this coming." He looked as if someone had knocked the wind from him. You don't mean that." I raised an eyebrow. "Don't I?" He stood now, too, suddenly taller but not stronger. "You're punishing me for Callie's words." "No," I said. "I'm punishing you for never standing between me and her cruelty, for pretending neutrality was love." He swallowed hard. I could see him calculating damage control PR spin apology tour. "You can fix this," he said. "We can make it right." I tilted my head. "No, Michael. You can make it right." "I already have." That night, after the guests had gone and the lilies began to droop in their vases, I walked through the house slowly, one step at a time. Every floorboard familiar, every light switch touched by years of habit. In the hallway, I passed the photo of Michael in his college cap and gown. I paused, looked at the pride in his younger eyes. Where did that boy go? No matter. I walked into the kitchen, opened a drawer, and removed the recording device. I placed it carefully in a small fireproof box alongside the updated will, the house deed, and a notarized letter to my lawyer. Just in case. I locked the box. Then I poured myself a glass of port. Not for celebration, but for survival. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't fire or fury. It's control. It's clarity. It's knowing exactly who you are and proving to the world that you were never anyone's burden. I didn't hear from Michael for 2 days. No apology, no explanation, not even a text. I wasn't surprised. That kind of silence doesn't come from confusion, it comes from calculation. He was waiting, measuring, hoping I'd cool off, forget, or maybe feel guilty enough to reach out first. But I didn't. Instead, I sat in the quiet corners of my house, the same house they'd planned to gut, and remembered. The way he used to crawl into my lap with scraped knees. The time he made me a Mother's Day card from printer paper and glitter glue that spelled, "You're the queen of our castle." It was always our castle, he said. Until Callie arrived and decided it was just prime real estate. By the 3rd day, he finally called. "Hey," he said, like we were still fine. I let the silence stretch long enough for discomfort. Then, "Yes, I wanted to come by. Just talk." Talk. A word that once meant connection between us. Now it felt like a tactic. "Are you bringing her?" I asked plainly. He hesitated. I thought, "Don't." I heard his breath hitch as if I'd smacked him. But I hadn't. That would have required me to care more than I did. He came by alone the next evening. No wine, no flowers, just guilt trailing him like a shadow. He sat across from me in the living room, staring at his hands. "I know you're angry," he began. "Disappointed," I corrected. "Anger passes. This is different." He nodded slowly. "I was weak." "Yes," I said. "You were—" Another silence. The kind you don't fill with apologies because no arrangement of words can reverse what's already been revealed. "You think I don't see what she is?" he said at last. "But I do." "Then why are you marrying her?" He looked up, eyes rimmed red. "I love her. Or I think I do. But it's like being in a room where every door leads to her no matter where you try to go." I watched him. And for the first time, I saw not my son, but a man who'd never learned how to choose himself. Because I'd always done the choosing for him. "That was my failure too. I enabled you," I said. "I never made you grow a spine because I thought love meant protection. But I should have taught you resistance." He blinked. "So this is it? You're cutting me off." "No," I said. "I'm stepping aside." He frowned. "You're a grown man, Michael. And I've spent 30 years trying to protect you from yourself. But I see now maybe pain is the only teacher left." He leaned back, exhaled hard. "So I lose everything." I shook my head. "Not everything. Just the illusion that I'll always be here to fix your mess." He looked shattered. But still there was no apology, only disappointment that his safety net had cut the ropes. That night, I went to the attic for the first time in years. The smell of cedar and thyme hit me in waves. I opened boxes. Michael's childhood drawings. My wedding dress yellowed at the seams. Letters from my late husband, sweet, clumsy, beautiful. And at the bottom of a file folder tucked under property records and legal notes, I found an old cassette tape labeled 1997 First Piano Recital. I smiled. Tears welled but didn't fall, because the boy on that stage with shaking fingers and proud eyes, he wasn't the man who let a woman poison his mother's name. But maybe, just maybe, if he heard that tape again, he'd remember who he used to be. The next morning, I mailed him a small box. Inside, the recital cassette and a note handwritten on thick parchment paper. "You once made music out of fear. You can still make a life out of mistakes. But only if you start listening truly. Listening. No threats. No warmth. Just truth." It was all I had left to give. And maybe that would be enough to start a fire in his bones. Not a fire of rage, but of reckoning. Because sometimes the cruelest revenge is letting someone face themselves without you there to soften the reflection. A week passed. The lilies were long gone. Callie never came back to retrieve them. The vases sat empty. My house, however, did not. It pulsed with a strange new energy. Not grief. Not relief. Something between the two. Freedom wears many outfits. Mine looked like quiet mornings and clean countertops untouched by false smiles and performative hospitality. Then one rainy afternoon, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text. A letter, folded neatly in a cream envelope sealed with wax. Her style. Callie's handwriting was flawless, like her curated online persona, rounded, slanted, a little too perfect to trust. I read it once. Then again. It said everything and nothing. "Judith, I'm sorry for how things unfolded. I may have said things out of context or frustration, and I never meant for you to feel unwanted. Families are complicated. We all make mistakes. I hope we can move forward with grace." With grace. That final line, a masterclass in irony. She'd used my name without even knowing it. I poured myself a glass of wine, not for ceremony, just habit, and sat by the window while the rain ticked, like Morse code against the glass. What did she want? An apology in return. An invitation to talk it out. Or maybe the start of damage control. Either way, I wasn't biting. The next morning, I called my lawyer. "Did the power of attorney papers get finalized?" I asked. "They did," he confirmed. "Judith, are you sure about removing your son completely?" "I am." He paused. "Do you want to name someone else?" I looked outside, watching a neighborhood boy ride his bike in zigzags across the wet street. "No," I said. "I think the house will know what to do when I'm gone." He chuckled softly. You always were poetic. No, not poetic. Just prepared. Later that day, I received another surprise. Michael, standing at my doorstep in the rain. No umbrella, no coat. Soaked, disheveled, holding the box I'd mailed him. The recital tape. I listened to it, he said, voice hoarse. Twice. I nodded but didn't invite him in. I remembered how you used to sit in the front row. He continued, even when I played like garbage. You never played like garbage, I said. You just played scared. He looked down. She told me not to come, he added. Said it would make things worse. She was right, I said. He looked up startled. But I'm here anyway. And what do you want, Michael? I asked. Not cruelly. Just honestly, he sighed. I don't know. That's the first true thing you've said in weeks. We stood there for a moment, just a mother and a son, water dripping off the past. I'm not ready to forgive you, I said. I understand. But I am willing to let you prove whether or not you belong in my life again. He nodded. Not through words, I added. Through time. Another pause. Then gently, there's an old bench in the garden. Still has your name under it. Go sit. I'll bring tea. He looked like he might cry, but he didn't. Instead, he smiled, small, broken, maybe a little real. Okay, he whispered. And so he did. He sat there for almost an hour in silence, just being like he did when he was 10, bruised and breathless from play. I didn't join him, not yet. Some things needed more time than a single storm to dry, because healing doesn't come from grand apologies or sweeping confessions. It comes from showing up in the rain without an umbrella and not asking to come inside. The next few weeks passed like soft ripples after a stone hit still water. Michael came by again twice. Once to return a tool he borrowed 10 years ago and forgot. Another time with 2 bags of groceries and a look on his face that said, I know you still don't trust me. And he was right. I didn't, but I noticed for the first time he was quiet around me in a new way. Not the silence of avoidance. The silence of watching. Listening. Learning how to be present again. Still there was Callie. Absent. Distant. And then intrusive. One Thursday morning, I received a visit from a man in a gray blazer with a clipboard. Ma'am, I'm here on behalf of Evergreen Heritage Homes, he said, glancing at the deed in his hand. We were told the property was being transferred. I blinked. I'm sorry, what? He adjusted his glasses. Your son's fiancée contacted our office about initiating the first phase of sale. She submitted your address as her future residence and requested the redesign team contact the current owner for clearance. I smiled. That slow, cold smile you reserve for people who underestimated your intelligence. Would you mind showing me that paperwork? He hesitated, then handed over a form. Callie's signature, bold and arrogant, marked under Owner in Anticipation. Gee, how poetic. I handed it back. I suggest you inform her that anticipation doesn't equal ownership, I said. This property is not for sale, nor will it be. The man nodded somewhat awkwardly, then left. His car tires splashed into the distance. I didn't call Michael. I waited. And as expected, he showed up that evening. No warning. Just shame. I didn't know she did that, he said, hands buried in his jacket pockets. I swear, Mom. I tilted my head. She thought she could sell my home before we even made amends. What does that say about her belief in your spine, Michael? He looked down. She crossed a line, I added. She did, he agreed. And I've ended it. That took me by surprise. I told her I needed space. Time. That I wasn't ready for marriage if I didn't even have the courage to defend my own mother. He looked up, then eyes wet but steady. I'm sorry it took me this long. There was silence between us. Then I walked over to the fireplace, removed the old photo of him and me at the beach. He was 6, clinging to a sand-covered bucket, and I was kneeling beside him with wind-tossed hair. I handed him the photo. I kept this out all these years, I said, even when she asked me to take it down. He held it like it was glass. She said I disgusted her from day one. I said quietly. You never told her that was wrong. He closed his eyes. I know, and now you've told her. What? That I was the one who should be disgusted with myself. That if she couldn't love the woman who made me who I am, then she didn't love all of me. I didn't speak. I let the moment breathe. Because sometimes it's not the apology that matters. It's the act of walking away from someone toxic without needing applause. That night, for the first time in months, we shared a meal together. Nothing fancy, leftover chicken pot pie and a bottle of half-drunk Merlot. He did the dishes, didn't ask, just did it. He didn't touch his phone once. And when he left, he didn't hug me or try to say something deep. He just placed the picture back on the mantel and whispered, "Thank you." I didn't say anything in return, because sometimes silence isn't absence. It's forgiveness in progress. A week later, I received another letter. From Callie. This one was venom dressed as vulnerability. "I see now that I never stood a chance with you. You judged me from the beginning. I tried to fit into a role you made impossible. Michael's confused now, but he'll come around." She ended with, "Enjoy your house while you can. Time is a cruel reminder." No signature, just space. I folded the letter, didn't shred it. Instead, I tucked it into my Courtroom of Life folder where I kept my recordings documents, and now, her words. Because threats don't scare women who've already been erased and rebuilt themselves from ash. I made a fresh pot of tea. Then I walked into the garden and sat on the bench, Michael's name still etched underneath. For now, he belonged there again. But she never would. It was strange the way the house felt warmer even though nothing had physically changed. The same curtains, same faded rug, same creaky cabinet with one uneven hinge. But absence carries its own kind of blessing. Callie was gone, at least for now, and I could breathe again without someone trying to smother my lungs with backhanded compliments and condescending smiles. The garden bloomed that week. Tulips I hadn't seen in years pushed up through the soil, stubborn and bright. The same kind Michael used to pick and smash into little bouquets when he was too small to know better. I left them there, uncut, wailed. A reminder that beauty doesn't always need arranging. That Sunday morning, while watering the pots, I saw him again. Michael, this time not with guilt on his face, but something I hadn't seen in years: earnestness. He brought coffee. Black for me, caramel cream for him. We sat on the back porch, legs wrapped in fleece throws, the garden humming around us like a lullaby. He told me things I hadn't heard before. About the pressure of being the only child, the quiet way Callie dissected his confidence with smiles, how he convinced himself that love meant swallowing discomfort. "I kept trying to make her like you," he admitted. "But all she wanted was for me to stop defending you." I raised an eyebrow. "When did you ever defend me?" He sighed. "I didn't out loud, but I did in my head." "That's not where mothers can hear, darling." He smiled. A sad knowing one. "I know." Later that afternoon, we went into the attic, the place where our family lived in boxes. He pulled out an old chess set, dusted it off, and we played for hours. He lost every game, and he laughed each time like it was the first real laugh he'd had in months. "Maybe I should have listened to you sooner," he said, moving his rook to nowhere in particular. "No," I replied. "You listened exactly when you were ready. That's the only kind of listening that counts." He nodded. Then, hesitating, he asked something I didn't expect. "Would you ever write me out of your will?" It wasn't accusatory. It was curious. Like he was ready to hear the answer and not argue with it. I looked him in the eye. "I already did." He nodded again, slowly, as if digesting medicine with a bitter coating. "And I respect that," he said. "Then would you ever write me back in?" That question hung between us like mist. I didn't answer. Not yet. That evening, I made a call. To my lawyer. "Hold the revision," I said. "Don't file it." "Not yet." He didn't ask why. Just said, "Understood, Judith." The next morning, I found something on my doorstep. A small envelope sealed with wax. Again. But this time not from Callie. It was from Michael. Inside, a single photo. Me and him, age 12, both grinning in the rain at some forgotten fairground. Behind it, a note. "You were never invisible. I just wasn't looking in the right direction." And taped to the back of the envelope, the key to the house I'd given him years ago when I thought I'd never need to lock anything from him. He was giving it back, not because he didn't want it, but because he finally understood what it meant. Later that week, I walked through the house and felt something powerful. Not just safety, sovereignty. This was mine, my story, my silence, my voice. And whether or not Michael earned his way back into the lines of the legal documents didn't matter nearly as much as this. He was trying, not with speeches, with presence. And Callie was fading into a memory, a cautionary tale, and almost was, because she misunderstood everything about me. She thought my politeness meant passivity, my silence meant surrender, and my old age meant fragility. But I wasn't fragile. I was forged. And steel doesn't scream. It cuts quietly with precision. Weeks slipped into a rhythm of quiet restoration, not of the house. It didn't need that. But of the self. The kind of restoration that doesn't need plaster or paint, only time, solitude, and truth. I found myself taking longer walks, not because I was avoiding anything, but because I finally had no one left to tiptoe around. One morning, I wandered into a small used bookstore tucked between a bakery and a dog groomer. The owner, a sweet woman named Francine, had silver hair twisted in a bun so tight it looked sculpted. She handed me a copy of The Art of War and smiled. "Sometimes the best stories are manuals," she said. I laughed. "Sometimes the best wars are quiet." Back home, I began journaling again. Not about the past. I'd already lived that twice. Instead, I started writing what I would leave behind, not just in my will, but in my words. Instructions, lessons, secrets. Because I knew now. Legacy isn't just money, it's clarity. That's what Callie could never steal. Then came the email. From her, not sweet this time, not apologetic, just bold. "You've poisoned Michael against me. I won't let you win." Win. The only game I'd ever played was survival. And unlike her, I didn't need an audience to clap when I took a breath. Still, she wasn't done. Attached to the email was a PDF, a spreadsheet. Dozens of entries, expenses, items, bought, dates, and one line highlighted in red. "Wedding down payment, Judith's house proceeds projected." She'd already spent money she didn't have. Money she believed would come from the sale of my house. Because she truly thought this war was over. She didn't know that I'd only just begun. I printed the spreadsheet, highlighted every fraudulent assumption, and then I called an old friend, retired attorney now dabbling in estate consulting. "Marital fraud," he said after reviewing the file. "She used projected assets in financial negotiations with vendors. If she signed any contracts under false ownership, she's liable." I smiled. "But I won't sue her," I said. "Not yet." He tilted his head. "Then what are you planning?" I leaned forward. "She wants war. I'll give her a stage." That weekend, I attended a local charity gala, a modest affair hosted at the same hotel Callie was rumored to have selected for her rescheduled engagement party. I wore emerald, not because it suited me, but because it was Callie's least flattering color. And I spoke, not to everyone, just to the florist, the event coordinator, a few of the vendors listed on her spreadsheet. "Be careful," I said, gently handing them copies of the file. "She's playing dress-up with other people's deeds." I didn't say more. I didn't need to. By Monday, Callie's vendor relationships were unraveling. She called Michael, screaming. He didn't answer. When he finally came to visit, he was carrying something. A manila envelope. Inside, her ring. He dropped it into my hand without a word. "She asked for money," he said. Said I owed her for wasting her time. I turned the ring over in my palm. It sparkled. Flawless. Just like her lies. "Did you give it to her?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not a cent." "Good," I said. "Because some debts are best repaid with distance." He sat down, elbows on his knees. "Why did I let it go that far?" I looked at him for a long moment. "Because we all want to be loved, even if we have to shrink to fit it." He nodded. "And now?" he asked. "Now you grow back." That night, I placed the ring in a small velvet box and labeled it, "For the Museum of Mistakes." I didn't hide it. I set it on the bookshelf right next to The Art of War. Because someday, when Michael's child, if he ever has one, asks why Grandma doesn't like diamonds, I want him to say, "Because they sparkle even when they cut you." By late spring, the air had changed. Warmth lingered longer in the evenings, and the garden bloomed with an audacity that felt personal. The hydrangeas were thick and defiant, the roses untamed. Everything that had once been trimmed to please others now grew exactly as it wanted. And so did I. For the first time in years, I hosted a dinner, not for someone else's milestone or curated image, but for myself. Just a small gathering. Francine from the bookstore, a few neighbors, even the florist whose contract Callie had tried to manipulate. No theme. No catered nonsense. Just good soup, strong wine, and laughter that didn't feel like armor. Michael arrived last. He brought dessert, his grandmother's apple tart recipe, the one I hadn't made since his father passed. He'd baked it himself, burnt the edges, forgot the nutmeg. Still, I nearly cried. We ate under the string lights I'd hung that morning with shaking hands and stubborn pride. He told stories, asked questions, laughed freely. And not once did he mention Callie. A week later, I received another envelope. This time from a law firm. Callie was suing me. Intentional interference with marital expectations and projected asset contribution. I nearly choked on my tea. I forwarded the letter to my attorney. He called me within the hour, laughing so hard I could hear his old smoker's cough. "She's trying to claim psychological damages over a wedding that never happened," he said. "Judith, I've seen petty before, but this is Olympic level." "What's our move?" I asked. "Honestly," he said, "nothing. Let her exhaust her own funds. This won't make it past initial review." Still, I couldn't help but marvel at her audacity. She had no idea that for every passive woman she thought she'd stepped on, there were dozens more like me who documented, remembered, and waited. Then came the reporter, a young woman from a small digital magazine that focused on elder resilience. She'd heard about the engagement party fallout from a vendor and requested an interview. I agreed. On one condition: no sensationalism, no revenge porn, just truth. She asked me what started it all. Words, I said. She asked what ended it. A pause. And then play. She smiled, nodded, and asked if I had advice for other women reclaiming their dignity in silence. I thought for a moment, then said, "People expect women like me to disappear quietly. I say disappear visibly. Let them watch you walk away, house intact. Name unsoiled heart, armored." The article went live a month later. Title: "The Woman Who Pressed Play at Her Son's Engagement Party." It went mildly viral, shared among caregivers' retirement blogs, even a feminist law journal. I didn't care about the comments. Except for one, posted anonymously. "You disgusted me from day one, but you played the long game. Respect?" I knew it was her, and I laughed. Because the last thing she ever gave me was proof that I'd left a mark. And I didn't even have to scream. Michael came over that night. He didn't mention the article. Just brought a box of old VHS tapes and asked if we could watch one. "Your piano recital," I teased. "Worse," he groaned. "High school talent show." We watched as he butchered an acoustic version of Wonderwall. I clapped anyway. Not because it was good, but because he finally understood what real support felt like. At the end, he looked over at me, voice low. "Would you ever put me back in the will?" I didn't flinch. "I already have." He blinked. I continued. "But it's contingent." "On what?" "Consistency." We didn't talk about Callie again. Not because we'd forgotten, but because she'd finally become what she feared most. Irrelevant. Summer arrived like an old friend, familiar, nostalgic, but with new wrinkles. The kind of warmth that made the porch swing creak just right, that loosened even the tightest memories lodged in the corners of the heart. Michael visited often now. Not out of guilt or obligation, but rhythm. We'd found something again, not the old mother-son dynamic that relied on my care and his comfort, but a new one. Built on earned respect, bound by silence, we both survived. One morning, while sorting through the cedar chest at the foot of my bed, I found the first check I'd ever written toward Michael's college fund. $40. Sown. Dated 1989. I smiled. He had no idea how hard I worked for that money-typing testimony at a 130 words per minute, while my hands ached and my heart broke for strangers in divorce court. I'd sacrificed pieces of myself so he could stand on 2 feet. And for a while he used those feet to walk away from me. But now he was walking back. I had just finished watering the begonias when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a woman I didn't recognize. Late 30s. Expensive sunglasses. A tension in her mouth that told me this was not a social visit. "I'm Erica," she said, taking off her shades. "Callie's sister." Ah, there it was. I stepped aside but didn't invite her in. "I won't take much of your time," she said. "I just Needed to see the woman who made my sister unravel. I smiled not unkindly. She unraveled herself. I just happened to be in the room when the seams snapped. Erica let out a short, bitter laugh. Fair. Still, she's not doing well. She's not my responsibility. She says you ruined her life. I pressed play on her own words. If that ruined her life, maybe she should have spoken differently. Erica looked at me carefully as if weighing my soul. You're not what she described. She rarely described anyone honestly. She called you manipulative, cold. I call it prepared. And consistent. Erica nodded, and for a moment I saw something soft pass through her. Do you hate her? I shook my head. No. Hate requires energy. I've spent enough. She opened her purse and took out a small envelope. She asked me to give you this. She said it's the last time she'll reach out. I accepted it without comment. Didn't open it. Not while Erica was there. Before leaving, she turned and said, "For what it's worth, I think you saved Michael. Even if it was messy." I paused, then offered the truth. Saving someone is rarely clean. That night, I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter handwritten in small, tight script. You were right. I tried to win. But you don't play. You just watch and wait. I thought silence was weakness. Turns out it's the sharpest thing in the room. Congratulations. You win. No signature, just silence. I folded the letter and placed it beneath the ring she once wore, both of them sealed inside a shadow box I labeled, "What Power Looks Like to the Wrong People." I didn't reply, because the final word doesn't always belong to the last person who speaks. Sometimes the winner is the one who no longer needs to explain. Days later, Michael and I sat on the porch again. He'd brought coffee and a new book to read together. When he saw the shadow box on my table, he pointed to it. Is that... Yes, I said. Her final note. He looked uneasy. You okay with all this? I stared into the horizon where the sun was just starting to fold itself into evening. I'm not okay with what happened, but I'm at peace with how I handled it. He nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. I'm proud of you, he said. I smiled. No, Michael. I'm proud of you. You finally saw what needed seeing. You grew a spine. You stopped waiting for peace and started demanding it. We didn't say anything else for a long while, just watched the garden as it danced in the soft wind. That night, I added something to the will, a single paragraph. To my son Michael, I leave not just this house, but every inch of its memory. May he always remember the walls he once ignored and the woman who never stopped standing inside them. I sealed the document and went to bed, peacefully, finally. Because this house, this life, this story was mine again. Fall arrived with a kind of elegance that made everything look touched by gold. The leaves outside my bedroom window turned burnt orange and crimson, as if nature itself was celebrating closure. Closure. Not the kind you chase from others, but the kind you grant yourself because waiting for apologies from broken people is like waiting for fire to turn into water. One afternoon, I received a formal letter from the law firm Callie had hired. Not another lawsuit. A withdrawal. Apparently, her new attorney advised her to focus on future opportunities rather than past entitlements. Translation: she'd run out of money and even her delusions had started charging interest. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I could. Freedom, after all, is not just absence of burden. It's the power to laugh without pain attached. Michael came by with a pumpkin pie and news. He was seeing someone. Her name was Elise, a pediatric nurse. Soft voice. Kind eyes. No curated angles or agenda behind every compliment. She knows about everything, he said. I didn't hide it. I looked at him, and in that moment I realized he had changed. The boy who once stood frozen while his fiancée sliced me apart in public was now a man who could speak his own name without asking for permission. How does she feel about mothers? I asked, sipping my tea. He smiled. She baked this pie with hers. Smart man. That weekend we had dinner together again. Elise came, and she brought her mother Jeanette, a retired midwife with eyes that held both laughter and quiet warnings. We sat under the old tree in the garden, the one that had once felt like a tombstone for my dignity. Now it felt like a monument to endurance. Conversation flowed like wine. Jeanette laughed so hard at one of Michael's childhood stories she nearly choked on her cider. And Elise. She looked at me with curiosity, not caution. After dinner, as we cleared the table, she turned to me and said, "Michael told me about the recording, the dinner, everything. I waited." She added, "He said it changed him. And that you didn't just save your home, you saved him." I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing, just pressed my hand gently over hers and nodded. Later that evening, after they'd all gone, I sat alone in the living room. The string lights outside still glowed softly through the window. A light breeze moved the curtains just enough to remind me the world was still turning even after the storm. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't fully accepted until now. It wasn't just my house I reclaimed. It was my name, Judith Grantham, the woman who was supposed to be forgotten. The woman whose dignity was meant to be signed away. The woman who didn't raise her voice, only her standard. I opened a small wooden box from my shelf and took out a cassette tape. The recording, I hadn't played it since the dinner, but I didn't need to anymore. Instead, I took it outside, lit the fire pit, and fed it to the flames. Not out of anger, out of gratitude. Because sometimes the proof you need is already etched into who you became. When I returned inside, my phone buzzed. A message from Michael. "Mom, would you like to come to dinner at Elise's next Sunday? Just you and me and her and Jeanette. No occasion. Just family?" I stared at the message for a long time. Not because I was uncertain, but because it felt like a door I'd closed had quietly unlocked itself again. I replied, "I'd like that. I'll bring the thistles. You bring the peace." The following Sunday, I dressed slowly, not out of vanity but ritual. I chose a plum-colored blouse with a subtle lace collar, the kind I hadn't worn in years. My pearls followed quiet symbols of survival, not elegance. And as I fastened them, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. There she was, the woman they tried to bury under false smiles and future plans that didn't include her. Still here, still shining. Elise's home was warm, not just in decor, but in atmosphere. Candles flickered on a maple wood table and soft jazz played in the background. No forced playlists, no curated aesthetics, just comfort. She greeted me with a long, genuine hug. Jeanette handed me a glass of mulled wine and said, "Any woman who can outwit a wannabe daughter-in-law deserves two." We laughed, and it felt good. Not the brittle kind of laughter that tries to fill a hole, but the deep kind, the kind that seals one. Michael set the table while Elise stirred soup. He moved through the house like he belonged. Not because it was his, but because he had finally learned how to carry himself without stepping on others. Dinner was simple: root vegetable stew, rosemary bread, warm pie. No performance, just presence. After the dishes were done, Michael sat next to me on the couch, quiet. I could feel something brewing. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Don't worry," he said. "It's not another vendor invoice." I smiled. He handed it to me. "I wrote something for you." I unfolded the paper. It wasn't long. Just a few lines scribbled in his uneven handwriting, the same loops and jagged edges I used to correct on homework assignments. "To the woman who taught me silence isn't surrender, who let me fall but never buried me in shame, who pressed play not to ruin me, but to wake me up." I didn't speak, didn't need to. Tears welled not from pain but from release. When I looked at him again, he wasn't a boy. He wasn't even just a man. He was my son again. The next day, I began a new document. Not a will, not a letter, but a story. Mine. I titled it, "The Art of Pressing Play." In it, I wrote about grace that does not bow, dignity that speaks only when it must, and the weapon of memory used not to destroy, but to defend. Because I knew someday another woman, older, tired, whispered about by the younger ones, might need it. Might need to know she's not crazy, not vengeful, not weak, just unseen. And that silence, when wielded well, can echo louder than rage. Later that week, I received a package. No return address. Inside, a single item, Callie's ring. No note. Just the ring, wrapped in tissue. Returned, as if she finally understood. She could never wear it without remembering what it cost her. I placed it back in the shadow box, next to the recording note, the receipt of her projected house sale, and my courtroom-style documentation labeled, Victory. Achieved without a raised voice. The following Sunday, I walked with Michael and Elise at the local park. We passed a bench beneath a large oak tree, the kind that makes you feel small in the best possible way. Michael pointed. Maybe we could have our engagement dinner here instead, he said, glancing at Elise with a smile. I raised an eyebrow. He laughed. If we get engaged? One day. Elise nudged him gently. He's still in training. I like her, I said. Me too, he whispered. And we kept walking. Not to anywhere specific. Just forward. Together. The leaves had nearly all fallen when Elise came by with a small plant in her arms, a jade tree thick with waxy leaves and bound in a ceramic pot painted with soft lilac flowers. It's for your windowsill, she said, setting it gently in the sunlight. Something quiet and strong. I stared at it for a moment longer than necessary. That's what Callie never understood, I murmured. Elise tilted her head. What do you mean? Quiet doesn't mean absent. Stillness isn't weakness. And some roots don't need to scream to survive. She nodded. That's why Michael admires you. Even now he says he's learning how to stand quietly. I touched one of the leaves. He'll need to keep learning. We all do. That night, I sat at my desk, an old mahogany thing that had survived 3 apartments, 1 marriage, and an accidental coffee spill in 1996, and began writing letters. Not to Michael, not to Callie. To myself, to the woman I was when all this began, to the version of me who thought silence meant defeat, who thought kindness would be mistaken for permission. I told her she was wrong to doubt herself, but right to wait, right to observe, right to believe in a quiet, deliberate justice that would bloom on its own time. I sealed the letter and tucked it behind the photo of Michael in his cap and gown, the one Callie once asked me to take down. I had considered throwing it away at one point. Now it felt sacred. The following weekend, Elise invited me to her family's harvest dinner. Nothing fancy, folding chairs, pumpkin soup, and spiced cider served in mismatched mugs. Jeanette wore a cardigan with dancing squirrels on it. Elise's nephew offered me a drawing of a dinosaur with my name spelled Judith. I told him it was perfect. Michael held my coat when the wind picked up. Small gestures, real ones. After dinner, he and I stood by the fire pit while the others roasted marshmallows. He looked at me and said softly, "You were right." I kept confusing peace with silence, and I confused loyalty with compliance. I sipped my cider. "You don't have to prove anything to me," I said. "I know," he replied, "but I want to." That evening back home, I looked again at the shadow box, the ring, the email printout, the spreadsheet with her imagined ownership of my home. All artifacts now, relics of a war that ended with no parade, just sovereignty. Then I added one last item, a note written on thick cream stationery in my favorite fountain pen. Forgiveness doesn't mean they're welcome back. It means they no longer have a seat in your soul. I sealed the box and stored it in the cedar chest, not out of shame, out of completion. Winter would come soon, but I wasn't afraid of the cold anymore. I had lived through a deeper freeze. The frost of being disregarded, of being called a burden, of hearing you discussed me from day one at a dinner hosted in my home. And I hadn't just survived it. I'd pressed play and walked away with everything they tried to steal. Dignity, voice, legacy, all intact. That night, I dreamed of the garden. The bench beneath the tree, Michael, age 7, carving a crooked heart into the wood while I pretended not to see. And in the dream, I sat beside him, older, wiser, stronger, and whispered, "You can carve anything you want into this world, son, but you'd better be ready to live with it." He looked at me and nodded. Then the bench vanished, and we stood in open ground, together. The holidays crept in without much fanfare, just the way I liked them. No extravagant displays, no guest list to impress, just a wreath on the front door and the scent of cinnamon drifting from my kitchen. Michael asked if I'd be willing to host Christmas Eve dinner. I hesitated, not because I was bitter, but because memories still lived in these walls. Some sweet, some jagged. He noticed my pause. "No pressure," he said quickly. "Elise and I can cook. We'll clean. You just show up in your own house." That made me laugh. "Deal," I said. They arrived early that afternoon, arms full of groceries and intentions. Michael brought firewood and a bottle of wine. Elise brought her energy soft but steady, like someone who knew how to carry a family without needing to perform it. The kitchen became a dance floor of quiet chaos. Michael burned the carrots. Elise forgot the salt. I just sipped my tea and watched it all unfold like a stage play I'd finally been invited to witness, not rescue. At one point, Elise pulled me aside and whispered, "I know what he did before. I don't excuse it. But I just want you to know I see you, and I will never ask him to unsee you again." There are some apologies that don't sound like I'm sorry. That was one of them. And it was enough. Dinner was imperfect and beautiful. No speeches, no toasts. Just real food and the kind of silence between people who no longer need to prove themselves. After dessert, Michael disappeared into the attic for a moment and returned with an old, dusty gift bag. Inside, a snow globe I hadn't seen in 20 years. "It used to sit on your desk," he said, placing it in my hands. I turned it over. Inside was a miniature piano surrounded by falling glitter. A music box beneath it played a slightly warped version of Claire de Lune. I smiled. "I thought you broke this," I said. "I did, when I was 9. And you said, 'We don't throw away broken things, we find new ways to hold them.'" He looked at me with tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. That line has haunted me. I met his gaze. "Then let it guide you now." Later, as the snow fell in soft, sleepy spirals, Michael and Elise left. The house went still. I walked to the living room and placed the snow globe back on my desk exactly where it once belonged. And then I did something I hadn't done in decades. I sat at the old piano. The keys were a little stiff, a few out of tune, but I played anyway. Slow, deliberate. Claire de Lune, just as the snow globe had whispered. And as the notes filled the room, I felt her. Callie. Not in presence but absence. Not haunting but retreating. Because no matter how hard she'd tried to erase me, I was still here, still playing, still whole. That night, I lay in bed and thought of all the women like me, the ones whose names get left off invitations, whose chairs are moved to the corner, whose lives are reduced to afterthoughts. To them I say, there is no expiration date on dignity. There is no silence that cannot become song. And there is no engagement party cruel enough to erase a mother who decides she will not disappear. Let them underestimate you. Then press play and take back everything. New Year's Day arrived like a whisper. No fireworks, no loud celebrations. Just a morning frost dusting the garden and a kettle gently boiling on the stove. I stood in the kitchen alone, wrapped in my favorite cardigan, watching steam rise in slow ribbons. And I felt peace. Not the fragile kind that can be broken by a text or a doorbell, but the kind that settles deep in your bones when you've told the truth, survived the fallout, and come out the other side without needing to shout your victory. I spent the morning journaling. The words came easily now. Not as a way to process pain, but to mark clarity. I wrote, "They tried to silence me with politeness. They tried to disappear me with paperwork. They mistook kindness for softness and stillness for surrender. But I remembered who I was, and I pressed play." That afternoon, Michael stopped by alone. He didn't say much, just handed me a small, neatly wrapped package. Inside was a leather-bound notebook embossed with gold letters. "For the next chapter." I ran my fingers over the cover. "You're not subtle, are you?" He smiled. "I've been watching you write in those flimsy spiral notebooks since I was a kid. Thought it was time you had something that matched the weight of your words." I opened to the first page. A message in his handwriting. "You taught me how to read between the lines. Now it's your turn to write the ones others will live by." We spent the afternoon drinking tea on the porch. The air was crisp, but the sun was strong. The kind of day that made you believe winter might give way to something softer. "I have a question," he said after a long pause. "All right. If Callie ever came back not to me but to you and apologized, truly apologized, what would you say?" I stared out across the garden. The wind gently shook the bare branches. "I'd listen," I said, "but I wouldn't open the door." "Why?" "Because not every apology deserves access. Some people apologize just to find the spare key again. And forgiveness doesn't mean forfeiting your boundary." He nodded. Slowly. "She said once that you'd press play and ruin everything." "Oh." I turned to him steady. I didn't ruin anything. I revealed it. And if your foundation crumbles after being seen clearly, it was never solid to begin with. That evening, I lit a fire and opened the notebook. On the first page, I wrote, "This is not a story of revenge. This is a story of remembering who you are, of pressing play when they expected you to bow out, of turning the volume up on your own worth when they tried to mute you, of being underestimated and unshaken." And then I wrote this sentence in bold. "Dignity doesn't scream, it documents." I never heard from Callie again, but I know she watches. The article is still online. The shadow box still rests in my study. The bench in the garden still holds Michael's name. And the house? It still belongs to me, not just legally, spiritually, because they didn't just try to steal a home, they tried to steal my place in it, and they failed. The piano sits near the window now, where the sun hits it just right every morning. Sometimes I play, sometimes I don't. But it's always there. Like me, they thought I'd go quietly, that I'd hand over my home, my name and my voice like an old coat at the door. But instead I pressed play. I showed them that silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. That dignity doesn't need to shout it, just needs to last longer than betrayal. This wasn't just about a dinner or a house. It was about reclaiming the seat they tried to pull out from under me. To every woman who's ever been dismissed, reduced, or made to feel invisible, you are not a ghost in your own story. You are the author. And if they try to write you out, pick up the pen, open your mouth, press play, and let them choke on their own dialogue. Do you know someone who needs to hear this story? Tag them. Share this. Let them know silence can be strength and dignity, always has the last word. Subscribe to Grace's Truth for more real stories of women who refuse to disappear.